Hi, I'm Jill Sturgeon, and I'm going to talk about learning science, memory consolidation, and desirable difficulties, and my approach to using Zoom polls to bring these ideas into teaching legal research on Zoom. Let's start with a poll, since that's what we're talking about today. Take a look at the question. Intuitively, it would seem to me that you should both show and tell someone how to do something before asking them to practice it. However, after researching some of the science on learning, I'm not entirely sure that that is the right choice. In the domain of memory research and theory, consolidation refers to the progressive post-acquisition stabilization of long-term memory, as well as to the memory phases during which such presumed stabilization takes place. On the diagram, consolidation takes place between short and long-term memory. If I asked you to fill in the blanks here, would you have guesses? According to the research, the activity of predicting the answer, even if you are wrong, may help you learn the information better. Did any of you guess encoding, storage, or retrieval? What about here? Does a fill in the blank question get you closer to the answer? Hint, it's the same word missing from each definition. Information. It is common to think that the function of testing is assessment, but in recent years, the role of testing as a pedagogical tool has received increasing emphasis. Information and procedures that are retrieved in response to a test of some kind not only become more retrievable in the future than they would have been without such a test, but they even become more retrievable than if they had been presented again for restudy. In that sense, the act of retrieval is a potent learning event, and retrieval is a memory modifier. So what is a desirable difficulty? Learning science, like the fable of the tortoise and the hare, teaches us that faster isn't always better. Conditions of instruction or practice that make performance improve rapidly often fail to support long-term retention and transfer. On the other hand, conditions of instruction that appear to create difficulties for the learner, slowing the rate of apparent learning, often optimize long-term retention and transfer. To the extent that we assume that current performance is a valid index of learning, we become susceptible to choosing less effective conditions of learning or practice over more effective conditions. We bet on the hare to win because we see that it is fast. It is important to emphasize that creating difficulties for ourselves or for those who we are responsible for instructing is not necessarily a universal good. In the real-world context, many of the difficulties we create are undesirable. Few would argue that the difficulties of 2020 should be termed desirable. The difficulties introduced by variation, spacing, interleaving, and so forth are desirable because responding to those difficulties engages the very processes that support learning comprehension and remembering. A note of caution, even those difficulties become undesirable if the learner is not equipped to respond to them by virtue of prior knowledge and current cues. You need to take into consideration students' current capabilities before introducing difficulties. All right, let's move on to Zoom polls. I think it's easy to see how a Zoom poll could be used to run reading quizzes or to actually poll student opinions. I used it to see whether students like doing polls. It was a poll on polls. My first polls were a bit like this, trying to test students' ability to retrieve information they should have read. Reviews of the testing literature have typically demonstrated the benefits of multiple choice testing for retention to be smaller than those of other formats where you fill in the blank or enumerate steps, for instance. On the basis of such research, we might speculate about the necessary properties that multiple choice questions must possess to bring about learning, in addition to the metacognitive strategy learners need to use in answering multiple choice questions. This sort of test design goes beyond my current understanding of learning science. However, when I talk about the desirable difficulty in my use of polls, it isn't in the language of the question itself. I like to begin most classes by challenging the students to find something. Yes, sometimes it is only tangentially related to the law, but it works as a good hook into the day's lesson. During in-person classes, I run it as a competition, and the first person to raise their hand to answer wins, but also gets to tell me how they found the answer. I would have them walk me through what they did to find the answer on my screen, and then demo any other strategies I want to add. This is a desirable difficulty type of exercise. They struggle with finding the answer until someone in the class figures it out. I tried to do the challenge activity with Zoom by having students raise their virtual hand or simply shout out the answer when they found it. What I found was that I wasn't as committed to letting them find the answer. I would panic at the sound of dead air. And with the variations in students' ability to keep their cameras on, it was harder to gauge where the students were in their search by observing their body language as you could in the classroom. Additionally, Zoom has some good features, but if you think about it, sometimes just finding the raise hand function takes 4.5 seconds. By putting the challenge into a Zoom poll, I was able to give the students a very low stakes way to struggle through that difficulty and choose an answer. The poll feature also lets me know when the major part of the class has made their guess. It is very low stakes since it's anonymous. So people who would not have volunteered to talk on camera take a shot at finding the correct answer. If they get it wrong, they're more likely to pay attention to subsequent demo. If they all get it right in the class, you might decide that such a demo is unnecessary. Studies in learning have shown that students need to ultimately succeed at the difficulty in order for it to be considered desirable. After the initial difficulty and demonstration, my class is sent to breakout rooms to practice using that resource or skill. That way they struggle at first and then end the class with success. Errors are a key component of effective learning. Evidence shows that even 100% errors in pretesting enhances further study. The trick with writing Zoom polls for these kind of treasure hunt challenges is to not give away the answer and the answer choices. So far, using very similar citations has worked pretty well. Even when it doesn't work perfectly, I think it makes people more willing to talk. Nothing makes a law student speak up like telling them they're wrong when they think they're right. On this one, some of the people chose none of these because there was a very similar title located near letter B, 45 section 210, which was what I had as the correct answer. I turned this into a teaching moment to remind them that answers aren't always located in one single source, and that you should always look at the table of contents and topically arranged sources to look at nearby and possibly related information. So again, some students disagreed, but in order to disagree, you have to be engaged and have thought about it enough to have an opinion, which are both great things in my book. So overall, using Zoom polls has been a very effective way to both introduce desirable difficulties and to engage students with the material. There are some sources here that if you're interested in reading more on learning science, you should pause the video and take a screenshot and look at these further studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill, for the great information. My name is Amer Abdullah, and in this portion of the video presentation, I will walk you through the process of setting up and utilizing a Zoom poll. Fortunately, Zoom polls are not rocket science. Sure, as you heard, the pedagogical reasoning behind the use of a poll question can be quite scientific. But the act of setting up a Zoom poll is straightforward. This is not to say that it is intuitive, merely that there are clear steps. Also, please remember that when considering the creation of Zoom polls, there are 3 variants. The first is the creation of a Zoom poll prior to a Zoom presentation. The second is the creation of a Zoom poll during a presentation. And the third is having a default Zoom poll set up by your institution. Now, let's walk through the creation of a Zoom poll prior to a presentation. Go to zoom.us and log into your Zoom account. Next, go to the Meetings page and click on your scheduled class. Note, if you do not have a scheduled class, you will need to schedule a meeting. On this web page, scroll toward the bottom of the page. there will be a section that indicates that you have not created any poll yet. To the right of the text, click Add to begin creating your first poll. Enter the title for the poll question. Be sure to check the anonymous box to make sure that our students' responses are kept anonymous. Click on the Single Choice button to ensure that students are only able to enter one response. In the Type Your Question Here box, write out your question. Next, you should type the answers to the question in the appropriate answer box. Once all of the answer choices are added, click Save. If you want to add more questions, feel free, but you are limited to 25 polls per webinar. To add a new question, click on the plus sign Add a Question, or go back to the Meetings page, scroll to the bottom, and click the Add button located at the bottom of the page. Next, let's walk through the creation of a Zoom poll once you've already started a presentation. This may happen when you are knee-deep in a presentation and a great question comes to your mind. Let's get started so we can create one with a presentation already open. Here, the steps are clear. With your presentation being shared with your class, click on Polls. Next, click Edit or Add a Question. If you click Edit, the Zoom Edit Meeting Polls webpage will appear. In the new webpage that opens, click on the first blank line and input a title. Next, click the Type Your Question Here field to the right of number 1. Write the question you want to present to the class. Note that the choice option should already indicate single choice. This is to ensure students can only click on one answer choice. Then click on Answer 1. Write your first answer choice here. Next, click on Answer 2 and write out another answer choice. Notice that there are optional areas to add answer choices. Here, we have added more days of the week. Also note that you have the option to add another question via the plus sign Add a Question option. Finally, click Save. This will populate your new poll within your Zoom app. Finally, let's walk through utilizing a preset Zoom poll. Not every institution will have a preset Zoom poll, but some institutions will, and this is an important aspect to remember, especially if you have to teach in a pre-designated Zoom classroom. Here at CU Law, our university requires classes to be held in specific Zoom rooms. These Zoom rooms are shared among faculty. In these Zoom rooms, we have populated a default Zoom poll. It looks something similar to this poll. Notice how the question box simply indicates question. Also, notice how each bullet choice is labeled A through E. Although plain and not apparently useful, in the proper context, this can prove quite the tool. Let's say you are presenting on a topic in a pre-designated Zoom room. You can tailor your slide deck to the constraints placed on you. Notice on this presentation slide, there is a question being shared with you all. The question provides answers matching the A through E option visible on the Zoom poll. We, as educators and presenters, should utilize these built-in presets to our advantage. Oh, and one more thing. Do not forget to stop sharing your students' results. Thank you all for your time. Please feel free to ask Jill and I any questions you have regarding this topic, and enjoy the rest of this conference.